HOA, Karen burned black man's house to the ground. They thought he would never recover. A black man whose home had been reduced to ashes, left standing in the street with nothing but smoke and memories. Neighbors whispered, some pitied, while others pretended not to see. The culprit? A woman from his own homeowners association, a woman who believed her power and privilege would protect her from the flames of accountability. But what no one expected was how the story would twist. Because just 1 week later, when she walked into a courtroom with arrogance in her step, she didn't realize the judge she was about to face was the very man whose life she had tried to destroy. Malcolm Harris was no stranger to hard work. In his mid-40s, he had built a reputation as a man of resilience, discipline, and quiet dignity, a decorated attorney who had risen from humble beginnings. Malcolm had never forgotten where he came from. Growing up in the South, he knew too well the sting of racism, but he also knew the power of perseverance. When Malcolm finally bought his dream house in a suburban community just outside Atlanta, it was more than a purchase. It was a statement. After years of late nights in law school and countless battles in the courtroom, he had finally given his family stability and peace. But not everyone welcomed him with open arms. The Homeowners Association, led by a woman named Karen Whitfield, seemed to have an unusual obsession with him. At first, it was small things. Complaints about his lawn, notes about the color of his mailbox, citations for violating community standards whenever his relatives visited. Malcolm ignored most of it, recognizing it for what it was, thinly veiled prejudice wrapped in policy. Karen, however, was relentless. She saw Malcolm not as a neighbor but as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in her neighborhood. And when he didn't bend to her intimidation, her resentment deepened into rage. To outsiders, Karen appeared respectable, polished, organized, the type who ran meetings with an iron fist and a fake smile. But behind that facade was a deep-seated sense of superiority. And for Malcolm, that superiority was about to become dangerous. What no one could imagine was how far she was willing to go, and how her hatred would ultimately consume her. It began with escalation. The warnings turned into fines. The letters became more aggressive, and Karen began making subtle threats. Malcolm stayed calm, filing everything away, trusting that the law would protect him if she ever crossed the line. But on a warm summer evening, everything changed. Neighbors recalled hearing shouting near Malcolm's property, though no one stepped outside to intervene. Hours later, as the sky darkened, flames erupted. His home, a 2-story symbol of his years of sacrifice, was swallowed by fire. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. The blaze tore through walls and memories alike. Family photos, legal books, furniture, even the piano his late mother had gifted him, all gone. Malcolm stood on the curb, barefoot, in disbelief as his life turned to ash before his eyes. Investigators worked quickly, and while accidents were common in older homes, this was different. Traces of accelerant were found near the back entrance. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's door. Camera revealed a figure, Karen, slinking around his property late at night, carrying a gas can. Her arrest shocked the neighborhood, though many whispered that they weren't surprised. Some had seen her harassment escalate over the years, but few had spoken up. That silence now weighed heavily. For Malcolm, it was more than just an attack on his home. It was a reminder of the fragility of safety for black families in spaces where they were never truly welcomed. He thought about the stories his grandparents told, about crosses burned on lawns, about neighbors who looked away, about justice that never came. And here it was again, only dressed in modern clothes, wearing the mask of neighborhood rules. Karen, meanwhile, acted as though nothing had happened. Even after her arrest, she carried herself with the same entitlement, convinced that her connections and influence would keep her out of real trouble. She told neighbors she'd be fine, that the courts would side with her, that people like Malcolm always played the victim. But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Malcolm wasn't just another victim. He wasn't just a homeowner picking up the pieces. He was a man whose career had prepared him for this exact fight, and fate was about to deal her a blow she could never have predicted. The courtroom was packed the day Karen's arraignment began. She walked in with her lawyer, dressed sharply, her expression smug. To her, this was a formality. She expected a slap on the wrist, maybe probation, maybe fines. Nothing more. She looked around at the gallery, chin high, ready to play the role of the misunderstood neighbor. But then the judge walked in. Gasps rippled through the room. The man in the black robe wasn't just any judge. It was Malcolm Harris. Karen's face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, as though her eyes were lying to her. The man whose house she had burned, the man she had tormented for months, was now the one sitting in authority, gavel in hand, calm, composed, unshaken. Malcolm's presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Every whispered comment, every dismissive smirk from Karen evaporated. Suddenly, the arrogance she carried into the courtroom had nowhere to go. Though judicial ethics prevented Malcolm from presiding over the actual trial, he would recuse himself to ensure fairness. The symbolism was undeniable. For a moment, Karen saw what true accountability looked like. She saw herself stripped of the power she thought she had, staring into the eyes of the man she tried to destroy. And Malcolm? He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply followed procedure, his professionalism sharper than her cruelty had ever been. In that silence, in that unshaken poise, he sent a message more powerful than words. Her hatred hadn't broken him. It had only revealed her. The trial eventually moved to another judge, as Malcolm stepped aside to avoid conflict of interest. But by then, the story had already spread beyond the courtroom. News outlets covered the shocking turn of events. A homeowners association leader, accused of arson, facing the very man she had targeted. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, accelerant residue, testimonies from neighbors. Karen's defense unraveled piece by piece, and her entitlement could no longer shield her. She was convicted of arson, hate crimes, and reckless endangerment, sentenced to years behind bars. For Malcolm, rebuilding was not just about bricks and wood. It was about restoring dignity, proving resilience. With community support, he began again, stronger, steadier, more determined to use his position to shine light on injustices others might ignore. What struck people most wasn't the fire or even the conviction, it was the irony. The same arrogance that drove Karen to burn down a man's house led her to walk into a courtroom blind to the truth. Power is not permanent, and hate has a way of consuming its host. Malcolm later spoke publicly, not about revenge, but about accountability. He reminded people that silence in the face of prejudice is complicity, that neighbors who looked away when Karen harassed him were just as much a part of the story as she was. And perhaps the greatest lesson? That resilience can turn tragedy into testimony. Because while Karen lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, her influence, Malcolm gained something unshakable. The proof that justice, however delayed, could still prevail. The flames Karen lit may have destroyed a house, but they could never destroy the man who stood within it. And in the end, the very courtroom where she thought she'd be untouchable became the stage where her downfall was sealed. So the question remains, how many more Karens walk among us, unchecked until their hatred finally catches fire?